what I love is, you're a Texan writing about Texas. Not to say that you can't write about, some, of course not. I mean, that would be ridiculous. But I love that. Right. So, my first thought was, what are things you think maybe writers don't get right about Texas that aren't from Texas?
Yeah, for the longest time, and I feel like the world's a little better about this, but I grew up when the old TV show Dallas was still on TV when I was a kid.
Yeah, me too.
That show was so popular that you would even go, like, I remember my first trip to Europe and I'm like 19 and the cab driver is like, "Oh, you're from Texas, like you have cows and is there an oil well in your backyard?" So for the longest time, I feel like, that was the stereotype of Texas that got the most play. And it got to the point when I was younger that I almost didn't want to watch a TV show or movie set in Texas because, like, the accents would be so over the top, and it just, it felt like not like the Texas that I lived. Of course, now I've gone and written a novel that also has kind of that bigness to it. So maybe I'm ripping off that stereotype a little too. But yeah. So, and I think, there's a lot of people that think of Texas as a rural state, and as just a red state, and we are so much more than that because now we've got so many major cities, right? And we have a huge amount of diversity in the population and a lot of different politics, right? It's just we still have those big sections of Texas that are red and are rural, but they're living, an hour away from these giant cities, that are some of the biggest cities in the US. So I think it's hard because there's so much variety in Texas. Maybe it's hard for people to just kind of hold all of it in their head at one time.
I think that's the best way anybody's ever put it I've ever heard. It's so much you can't put it all in your head what all is Texas. That's a great, wow. We're clipping that. That's gonna be a quote for social media for sure. That's it. Because you're exactly right. I lived in Europe myself. My mom's from Mexico, so I lived in Mexico too. Like the ideas of what people have of Texas is exactly what you said, right? Like, and still to this day, it's kind of ridiculous what people will say to you. Like, well, yeah, we're riding around on horses with 6-shooters. Like, dude, like for real, you really saying that to me? You're not joking? You really think that? I mean, how crazy is that? That's like, I think everyone in Alaska is living in, igloos or whatever. It's like, that's
Right.
not, I mean, that's crazy.
They're only fishermen. They only are on fishing boats.
Yeah, I mean, it's and sometimes it's people who have traveled, so you think they wouldn't have those preconceived, but you're right. Texas is just so much. It's such a big state. There's so much. It has everything. I'm constantly telling people that I talk the myths I see in the news of Texas, this and that. It's like, no, the state is so complicated. There's so much to it. It's really not one particular thing. And it's like you said, it really is just like you said. It's just so big. It's just, sometimes just too much for people to understand that it can be that nuanced and diverse and have all the things that you said. Yeah. Wow. Beautifully put. You're a writer. Makes sense. Great job.
Well, and I was even surprised, like I found when I was in a writing fellowship and there were 2 other writers in our kind of cohort that were from Louisiana. And I realized, like I'm from, about an hour off the coast of Texas outside of Houston. And we're so close to that Gulf Coast that I shared more in common aesthetically with Louisiana writers than I did from somebody that was writing from like El Paso or Lubbock, or even Austin to a certain extent. Yeah. So it's those regions, like we're just so much geography wise that's going to impact the types of cultures in those towns too.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. That part of East Texas, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, it's got more in common with Louisiana, 100%. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, sometimes, that part of the border, you don't really know where you're crossing unless it told you, right? Unless it said it on a sign, you really know where you're getting into. It definitely mixes together. Yeah, for sure. That's a solid point for sure. And again, that's shows the different aspects of Texas. Like, well, you grew up in Texas. Well, where?
Yeah,
because we're going to have completely different experiences potentially, right? I mean, just like you said,
totally. Yeah.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
if
that's
someone grew
interesting.
up in Plano versus grew up in McAllen, right? There's very little in common between
Absolutely.
the two things.
Absolutely. It's complete. Yeah. 100%. Absolutely. Yeah. Just like you said. Yeah. Okay. Well, so why write about Texas, your first book? I'm
Yeah, I
curious.
can't seem to write about much else, unfortunately, or fortunately, right? Depending on who you are.
Hey, I'm all about it. I mean, I'm all about, look at this. Okay, I got the here. I mean, yes, this is the podcast too. So I mean, I do, but look, I do love the state and I love it a lot. So yeah, but I was definitely curious if you felt pressured maybe to write about something else, or I don't
You know,
know.
one of the things that I feel like is like the ideas because I wrote short stories before I wrote the novel, and
Sure, of
when I
course.
when I have ideas, they are typically rooted in setting first. Even before I come up with characters, I think of like a place that I want to put characters in.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I think every writer's different, like in where they get their inspiration, but a lot of my stuff starts that way. And I think because of that, I feel like I can only set stories in places I know really well. And I've only lived outside of Texas for 2 years. So I spent 2 years in Northern California. And I think I have like half of a short story set in Northern California. So 2 years is enough to get half of a short story out of me. So I gravitate, yeah, back to Texas. And I also, I would love to talk to you about this because people are asking me and I don't have a great answer. I'm not typically a person who's like super rah, like school spirit or like super patriotic, but Texas, I still love in a way that is like outside. And I know so many Texans do. Do you have any theories on why that is? Even though if we can see all the problems that are in Texas too, why we have this like affection that can so easily blot out, what we might like less.